Welcome to the part 2. Now that we have shown you in the first part how a consultant can very easily create a prototype which is defined in cooperation with the customer in order to develop the final product afterwards, we now enter the second part, in which the so-called basic application is developed. In this basic application, the GUI logic is implemented, and secondly the database as well as the business process logic are integrated, thereby completing the application. We will now demonstrate this to you live using the address management example. This can be done in one step. In the SHD, however, we worked with 3 separate steps, namely a prototype, then a basic application in which the database integration was already done, which is done via GPA, and the GUI logic is implemented. The third step is done when the business logic is implemented. Thereby we have a continuous process chain. It can be done in this way, but doesn't have to be.
Now we operate the machine from the perspective of a software developer and not that of a consultant. For this, we reopen the address book. As you can see, at this point, the project has a lot more features which the consultant cannot see, with options for the database system like EJB2, EJB3, web services, servlet, portlet, swing, or whether the program documentation should be written in English, and so on. Here, we'll choose a simple option, namely MySQL, because it can be quickly installed, and select Servlet as a web application. Now we have to add a few things technically. These are the database name, which we will call test customer address, then a project directory, then a Java package called de.scc.address.management, then we enter an author. This is written in all the source codes, a copyright, a project ID, a project version, here 1.0. In the attribute Java class for project, we'll enter address management. That would be all for the moment. Everything else can be completed by hand as a developer, but you can also get help from an assistant, which can be activated in the menu item Quality Improvement. And as you can see, the generator automatically completes the entries. Here you can see that the objects not only show the attributes that we have added, but also an ID, a client number, so that the system is also client capable, or an indication of how and when the data set was last changed and by whom. The developer needn't be concerned about any of these things anymore because they are also produced automatically. He must only define that the attributes that the consultants have qualified, title, surname, first name, and date of birth, are data fields which persist. The tables and fields are automatically created by the generator. Even in the areas of object relations, new attributes have been generated automatically. For example, the relation address to customer, an attribute relationship ID with customer card, or client-client. If we don't like the attribute loyalty card, then instead of loyalty card, we could just choose customer ID. Database relations are thus generated automatically. You can also order the attributes at your own discretion just by moving them, as you can see here. And then we need only assign the attributes sheet, postal code, town, and address type by click. These are database fields to be stored in the database. That is, the tables, the fields, and the indexing are automatically created. Indexing can also be defined. For example, we can specify here that we still need an index name and date of birth. So, if customers are sorted by name, but have the same name, then they are automatically sorted by date of birth. So, we define a new index called name date of birth. We could also specify at this point that the system does not allow two clients to be registered who have identical names and birth dates. In this case, we set the parameters to emergency unique. Now the term name, date of birth is entered in the properties. As you can see, the role of the developer is relatively straightforward. He only needs to assign which attributes belong to the index, and this is done simply by drag and drop. In addition, we must of course complete the validation, which dictates that the customer must be of legal age, since the consultant has indicated this to the developer in this field. We now enter the validation parameters in months, 18 years making 196 months, and we put a minus in front of it since it is 18 years in the past, and then we use drag and drop to indicate that this attribute relates to the field date of birth. Well, that's about all, and now we'll just generate the application once as a Java Enterprise application. We click on Generate, then click on our Address Management project, and on the right we see that it still appears in the system as a specialist project. So we change the architecture interface in the Java Enterprise and after a refresh, we see the matching templates. To test it, we'll generate only a single file.
What happens now when you generate?
The machine produces Java code as if handwritten.
This application is now native run capable. That means I do not need a special framework, not a specific program.
Yes, this is a complete Java application which the machine now produces completely from A to Z. Now we choose the template with the two objects and click Generate. On average, up to 10,000 lines of code per second will be written. This process here has taken just 5 seconds to produce 31,930 lines.
Can we start the application now?
Right away. We just need to start the initialization only once more per project, since the generator for Eclipse produces all artifacts for the development environment. Since it has generated 493 lines in less than a second, we switch to Eclipse, open a new file as a Java project, select our address management, and after a refresh, we can see that the application is error-free. Before we can start the application, we need to initialize the database. So a database is created, in this case, a MySQL database. We have to click in our project management DB MySQL address. It could also be Oracle, Postgre, SQL, Cache, or by using JPA, any other database. Now we copy this script, which has also been completely generated, go to the MySQL console, insert the script, and we've initialized the database.
And I only have to do this once?
Yes, we do this once, after which it will be automatically generated. But the first time we have to set up the project manually, as it were. It must still be noted that the application is multi-language and the texts must also be produced, which will then be automatically imported. To do this, we click on Scan Program Texts, open it, go to our project, open scan.addressmanagement.ini, and click once initially to generate only German. Now, all the text files are generated, including the alerts. Now we can start the application. Click on Refresh. Here we can also see that everything is fine on the part of the server. Then we click on Add and Remove, and we still have to copy all the images and style sheets in our address management, as it is, of course, a web application. Again, we need only do this once, then refresh and server start button. And then the browser http://localhost:8087/addressverwaltung/start/do box. Since we have initialized a minimum of the database here, you can see in the console that the SAG has tested the whole database structure and some tables, which are missing of course, but the tables that we have initialized have been automatically checked and the content has also been imported. The application is now started and a working enterprise application. Here we have our customers. We can sort by name and date of birth. We can also insert a new customer directly. We leave out date of birth at first, but the application tells us directly that this is a mandatory field. So we enter the date of birth 1/1/2000. And the application shows us directly, as defined previously, that the customer must be of legal age, which the consultant had instructed and the developer has completed. Now we give the 1/1/1980 as the date of birth, and we can save the data easily. For this customer, we can now also add addresses, and we see that the graphic interface is not adjusted. But this is not a problem. We can just switch back to the dialog editor open the address type in the object panel fields and adjust the size. Then we move into the generation. Click on our project, click on the address, and click Generate. Then we go into Eclipse, click Refresh, and restart the server unless we start in debug mode, then change the alternator on the fly. Now we start the application in the browser. Then we go back to the menu Customer, and if we want to add a new address, then we see that the fields have been adjusted as desired. We can also click OK without entering a street or house number and then enter, and we see that the system, according to our specifications, will not allow this. Now we enter a complete address and it's accepted by the system. Now we create a customer with only the name Miller and without an address, and because we have entered header in detail, we also see the customer name in the name field, regardless of whether an address exists or not. We can assign the customer Miller an address later. Of course, we also have an integrated search function, which is here linked to the birth date. We are now, for example, looking at customers who were born between 1960 and 1975, and customer Miller already appears, who was born in 1970.
I would like to do what often typifies software development, as well as the problem of the associated business, namely that someone has a change request. What do we do if we want to add an additional field, email, in the address?
This is not a problem. For this, we go back to the model workplace. We are now in the real application and not in the prototype. Go to Projects, Address Management, Objects, Address, Attributes, and via the menu item New, simply add the attribute Email. Then we define that it's a database field and an input in detail. In the dialog editor, we position the field as desired, and after saving, we click on Generate. Now, since it is multi-language, by doing a refresh, we regenerate the texts. Switch back to Eclipse, give the refresh command, see that the program is correct, and then restart the server. In the background, the generator has verified that the address does not have the email field, and it has automatically added it to the database, as all the code for this is already available. Thus, the entire database update is done. And now, when we click a customer profile in the web application, we can see in the address data the new field email, which we can now also fill in. Another important point is the issue of user role rights. Here we define a new role that we'll call guest. In the list Role Rights, we find, among others, the item Edit Account Info. By checking two boxes, we allow the user to view and modify customer data, but he may neither create a new customer nor delete any, and we only allow him to view address data. Now we need to create a new guest user. Assign him the role of the guest here, change the password for the guest, and now we will log out and then log in again using the guest profile. As you can see now, the guest, as predetermined, can access only the menu item customers. He can make changes there, but the command item to create new customers or to delete is missing. This means that the entire access right system is already fully and stringently implemented by the application. And as we can see in the section Address, the icon I shows that we can just view the address and that it is read-only.
That means that I no longer need to deal with this issue as a developer. How flexible is this roll and write system?
That goes right down to the field level. So there are no restrictions in the number of roles, writes, and users. We can define them completely as desired. We could also specify that emails may be handled only by specific users. This is all done by the same quick process.